Excuse me. My question is, how does your faith affect what you do?
In terms of my life or my politics? Both?
Everything.
Well, my faith has a huge influence on me. I hope it does, because my faith teaches me to care for the less fortunate. And obviously, the first thing I learned from my faith is the most important job I have is the husband and father. The most influential job I will ever have is the 16, 15, 17 years I have to influence my children and who they become. And not just by what I say to them, but by what they see me do. In public service, it influences me in a lot of different ways. First, our nation was founded on a spiritual principle, on the notion that we're all created equal because we're endowed by our Creator with certain rights, life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. And the only reason why we have a government isn't to grant those rights, but to protect those rights. I believe that every human being has God-given rights that the job of government is to protect. And so that influences me deeply. Beyond it, I would argue that it's one of the reasons why I've come to be a strong supporter of free enterprise, because it's the only economic model in the history of the world where people can achieve their potential, even if they aren't born into great wealth or privilege. If you travel around the world, here's what you're going to find. The more the government dominates the economy, the more that people influence government win at the expense of everybody else. And so when you go around the world, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find societies where the same rich families and the same big companies have dominated those countries decade after decade. Only in free enterprise can an employee become an employer. Only in free enterprise can someone that's born into a family that isn't poor or connected, through hard work, discipline, self-control, and talent, achieve a better life for themselves, and in fact, maybe even put their former boss out of business because you're better at it than they are. That's why I love free enterprise. That's why I'm a strong supporter, because I think it's the best program to eradicate poverty. The only way to eradicate poverty is to allow people to find better paying jobs. And free enterprise does that better than any other economic model in the world. So my faith has influenced me to care about the less fortunate. I do support a safety net. I don't think free enterprise works without a safety net to help catch people that are having a tough time. But I also know that the safety net cannot be a way of life. It cannot become a lifestyle. And in fact, it's become that for many people. And my faith also teaches me that that's not good for the soul. It's not good for people. It's not good for their aspirations for the future. So for all those reasons, I'm glad my faith influences my role in government, as well as the way I try to govern myself in my life.
Hi, Governor. What I'd like to do is ask you a question. I feel a little uncomfortable even saying it. I've done a lot of research. I've watched your stump speech a couple of times, and I haven't heard anything new, so I want you to say something new here. And my question is about military spending. You said before, and I totally agree, the government's role is the military. And you also said that you wouldn't cut your mother's Social Security. Great, two things I really like. But I have a hard time balancing the two, in that military spending, yes, has been cut recently, but we're still investing in, the super jets. We have multiple hundreds of bases throughout the world. I think there's a lot of waste in our Pentagon spending, and I don't want taxes to be raised to pay for government spending at the expense of the younger people that are not in this audience that are going to suffer with a cut in Social Security.
It's a good question. So let me first begin by saying that defense spending is not the reason why we have the debt. And I agree with you about waste. I'm not in favor of waste in any program. Even if the program is a small portion of our budget, we should never be throwing away taxpayer money. And so I do support reforms in contracting. We need more competition, for example, in defense contracting. Because, for example, any of you that are in business will know this. If there's only one bidder on a project, you're not going to get the best price. And in many instances, that's what we find in defense spending. So there's no doubt we need to do a better job of it. But we also have to understand the threats this nation faces are significant. And in fact, economic implications of global instability are greater than they've ever been. This is the most powerful nation on earth, the most important nation in the world, the largest economy in the world, and we are economically impacted by global instability. And one of the things that helps ensure global stability is a strong U.S. Military. It actually prevents war. And every time we've cut defense spending in this country significantly, we've had to come back later and make up for it, and it costs a lot more money. There's a fundamental misunderstanding about the debt. The issue with the debt isn't just the sheer amount of dollars that we owe, it's what it represents as a percentage of our overall economy. And right now, it's too large. If you think of the economy as a pie and the debt as a slice of that pie, well, today the debt is as big as the pie. And we have a big problem. So the only way to deal with the debt is the combination of dynamic and sustained economic growth that makes the economy bigger, but also reforms that hold the line on spending increases in the future. And the majority of the spending increases in the future are going to come from mandatory spending programs for future generations when they retire. People like me and like my children. Those programs will not be able to afford us in the out years if we don't make reforms on how they work for us. And so the good news is if we can make those reforms now, we can bring those mandatory spending programs, the arc of their spending, under control. But we also have to do the economic growth component of it. You have to do both, which is why I led off by talking about how we're going to grow our economy. That brings the debt under a manageable level. So for example, if our debt was $2 trillion, not 19, we'd be very happy. It's still a lot of money, but that's $2 trillion for a $19 trillion economy. If Italy had a $2 trillion debt, they'd be very concerned because they only have a $2 trillion economy. So our goal is to make our economy bigger and hold the line on the growth in our debt by reforms to the mandatory spending program. That brings the spending on an arc that's more sustainable, and suddenly the debt becomes much more manageable. But cutting defense spending has never worked. Cutting waste, absolutely. But cutting defense spending has never worked. We need to modernize our long-range bomber. We're still using the B-52. One of the key components of our nuclear triad is the Ohio-class submarines. They need to be modernized. We still need more of those jets that you mentioned because stealth technology has never mattered more than in the 21st century. We're seeing force reductions in our Army of 40,000 positions. We're on track to have the oldest and the smallest Navy and Air Force in the modern history of this country at a time when every one of our potential adversaries is expanding rapidly their own capabilities. The Russian economy is in total collapse, but they've held the line on military spending harmless. The Chinese are undergoing the most aggressive military expansion in the history of the world. The North Koreans, led by a lunatic, possess dozens of nuclear weapons and a long-range missile that can already hit the United States. The Iranians are about to get $150 billion of sanctions relief, which they're not going to use to build bridges and hospitals. They're going to use it to sponsor terrorism. They're going to use it to build a long-range missile that can hit the United States. And eventually they're going to use it to build a nuclear weapon or buy one. These are real threats. And none of these other things we're going to talk about matter if we aren't safe. And a military component of it is critical.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. While you were in the Senate, I looked up and I discovered that you'd missed more votes than anybody there, Republican or Democrat, over 8%. And also one last week, which had to do with military spending that you weren't there at. And just wanted to know what your
Yeah, because I'm running
reason
for
for that.
president. I'm here in New Hampshire talking to you. And here's why. Because I've been in the Senate now for 4 years. And I'm proud to serve the people of Florida in the United States Senate. Some of the most rewarding things we do in the Senate, for example, is constituent service. People come to your office. I've been through a drive-thru at McDonald's. And the lady comes with a story that she has about her family, and it's incredibly rewarding to be able to help her. I've had veterans who have issues with the VA. My brother's one of them, and being able to help them. All of that's very rewarding, and we love doing that very much. But I'm frustrated. I'm in Washington, D.C., watching all these problems we just talked about, and nothing is happening. Then I see we just win the majority in 2014, and still nothing happens. And what I concluded is nothing's going to change here unless we put the right person in the White House. And that's why I decided to run for president. And to run for president means you are going to miss votes. Everyone who's ever run for president out of the Senate has missed votes. Why? Because I'm here talking to voters. I'm not on vacation. I'm here talking to each of you about the future of America. And I hope that we can be successful in this campaign so we can start to make a difference. So the next time they take votes in the Senate in a year and a half, they won't be show votes. There'll be votes we can actually pass, and we'll have a president that will actually sign it. Sign things like the Keystone Pipeline. Sign things like rebuilding the military.
I have 4 children in middle school and high school, and my question is, as president, what will you do to put education back in the hands of parents and local government?
Yes.
Give us more choice and free us, parents, students, and teachers, from Common Core.
On my first day in office, I will sign an order ordering every and all U.S. federal agencies that are involved in the implementation of Common Core to cease and desist from all work in implementing it. I support curriculum reform. I support curriculum reform. And we did it in Florida when I was the Speaker of the House. We improved our curriculum at the state level. And let me tell you why that's important. Because if you have a problem with the school curriculum, or any of you have a problem with the school curriculum, you can go see your school board member, you can go see the principal, you can go see your legislator. Try going to the Department of Education at the federal level. You won't find a person to talk to about it. We don't need a national school board. In fact, I don't even think we need a Department of Education at the federal level. And I feel real strongly about that as a parent myself. Where's the flag? Oh, yeah.
Senator, I served in Iraq, and I had the pleasure of having 12.5 Iraqi foreign nationals working for me as translators and going out on missions. These were people who had their backgrounds checked and were fully vetted, and they had no promise of any consideration for getting out of the country if things went south, which indeed they did. Now currently in the news we see about refugees out of Syria and figuring out what countries are going to take what percentage of refugees who aren't vetted. And I'm wondering, if President, would you support policies where people who put themselves and their families at personal risk to serve with our servicemen go to the back of the line, and we let unvetted personnel or people go to the front of the line?
Yeah, it makes no sense. You're absolutely right. Not only that, it hurts our credibility. You know, this word gets around. I mean, it's not like these people go quietly into the night. I mean, they tell other people, the Americans betrayed me, or the Americans turned their back on us. That reputation becomes embedded in the region. It's one of the things that Putin is taking advantage of, maybe not that specific instance, but in general. The argument that Putin's using in the Middle East is Barack Obama is an unreliable guy. You know, he talks a lot, but he doesn't really do anything. Look at us. We were here 2 weeks and we're already, conducting operations. And we're reliable and America isn't. He's making that argument to Iraq, but he's going to make the same argument to the Egyptians, the Saudis, even the Israelis. And so you're absolutely right about that. And on the issue of refugees, let me just say this. We've always accepted refugees in this country. We accepted them from Vietnam after the fall of South Vietnam. I live in a community with refugees, people that came from Cuba fleeing communism. It's not that we don't want to accept refugees. It's that in order to accept them, they have to be vetted. And it just isn't easy to vet someone from Syria. You can't just pick up the phone and call someone over there and say, hey, do you know so-and-so? The phones aren't working that well right now in Syria, among other things. So it's not that we don't want to do it, it's that we may not be able to do it. It may not be possible to vet people, and as a result, we may not be able to accept refugees because of that. But the instance you pointed out, people that have served alongside our men and women in uniform, who risk their lives and the lives of their families by being identified with us, it is wrong that people like that have been pushed to the back of the line.
Senator, I have to say I've heard you speak several times about climate control and not fighting it because the U.S. can't win the battle alone. China has recently introduced a groundbreaking program to limit carbon emissions with a cap-and-trade program. And I'm wondering, when you are president, what will you do to match their commitment to fighting climate change?
Well, first of all, the Chinese have said that in the year 2030, they're going to begin to do some stuff. We'll see. Number one, they continue to emit more carbon into the atmosphere than any other nation on Earth. The second point I would make is, look, the climate is always changing. There's never been a time when the climate was unchanged. The debate for me as a policymaker is, what can we do about it? So I have these people come forward as a policymaker and say, we want you to pass this law, cap and trade, or whatever it may be. And I ask them, okay, well, if we pass this law, how many inches of sea rise will it prevent? Well, it won't prevent any, at least not for 150 years, and only if other countries do the same thing. Okay, so it won't really be a measurable impact on the environment. On the other hand, I asked the economists, what will this do to our economy? Well, it'll make living in America more expensive. It'll make it harder to hire people. It'll make it more difficult for businesses to succeed in America as opposed to somewhere else. So I'm presented with these options that have deep economic costs, no environmental benefit. How is that a good deal for the country? As president, I'm not going to support anything that hurts our economy and does nothing to help our environment. Now, do I believe this issue is one that can be confronted over time? Yes, I do. You know how? I think the American innovator is going to help solve a lot of this by making us more energy efficient. I have no problem in leading the world in solar and wind and bio renewables and so forth, but we're also going to lead the world in oil and natural gas. We are not going to emasculate the American economy and hold ourselves back from economic growth and development, especially at a time when millions of Americans are struggling, stuck in low-paying jobs that are leaving them living paycheck to paycheck, and in some instances working and on public assistance. And so I'm not supporting any policies that are bad for our economy and do nothing for our environment. Hi.
I actually don't do this kind of thing, and a friend of mine brought me here, and I have been following you.
It's not that bad, is it?
No, it's actually pretty cool. I have been following you. And I noticed you're talking about, you know, you have children. You have young children. And a lot of these people here are veterans. But what about our generation, the ones that count now, the ones that our votes are going to be going for, the one that Social Security is going to be taken away from? What do you want to do? How are we going to get better paying jobs? You're talking about education, changing education, which is great for the younger generation coming up. But you got us who are working paycheck to paycheck, barely making it, working, you know, 2 jobs. We can't get ahead, and we don't fall under the tax break. We don't fall under the Obamacare. We fall through the cracks. It's our generation now in the 30s and the 40s that are suffering the most. How, as a president, what is something you can do as a president in the next 4 years to help us?
Well, first of all, we're going to have a pro-family tax code. And one of the things I've called for is an increase in the per-child tax credit, because for working families, it's more expensive than ever to raise children. But beyond it, here's the bottom line. We need to create government policies that make it easier for the private sector to create jobs for you that pay more. And that's not happening right now. Jobs that pay more are not being created. That's why when they say, oh, the unemployment rate is down to 5%, there's 2 things they aren't telling you. Number 1 is the millions of people that aren't even looking for work anymore, so they don't count towards the count anymore. And number 2, the jobs that are being created don't pay enough. You can't live on those jobs. We need to make America the best place in the world to create jobs that pay more. And what's holding that back? I'll tell you what's holding it back. A lot of it is government policies that make it harder to hire people, that make it more expensive to hire people. Obamacare, which you say you don't even benefit from, makes it more expensive to hire people and more expensive to pay them more. So they don't hire more people and they don't pay them more. Regulations, especially for small business, makes it more expensive to be in business. For the first time in 35 years, we have more businesses start dying than starting. That's not good for job creation. We don't allow companies to immediately expense their investment. If I invest money in a small business to grow it, I have to take that money back in my taxes over a large number of years, as opposed to getting it back right at once. If we had a tax code that said the more you invest in your business, the less you're going to owe in taxes, not only would they hire more people, they'd be able to pay people more. Well, that's why we need to reform the tax code. We can't be globally competitive with the most expensive business tax rate in the developed world. We have to make America the best place in the world for the private sector to succeed. In turn, the private sector will create jobs that pay more. And it goes back to the point I've always made to people. My father was not a business owner. He owned like a small grocery store for probably a second and a half. It didn't go well. But my father was largely an employee. He worked as an employee at a hotel. The reason why my father had a job that paid enough for him to be able to support his family was someone who had access to money risked that money to build that hotel. And Americans made enough money after they paid their taxes and their bills that they could take vacations to Miami Beach. We need to get back to a place in our economy where people are incentivized to create more sources of employment that pay more so that people can make more money. And then we also have to ensure that our government isn't doing anything to make your life more expensive by passing ridiculous executive orders that make your energy bill go up while your income is flat. And the other thing is, some of those better paying jobs are going to require more skills than some people have right now. I don't know your story, but I would venture to guess that if you're working full-time, or both of you are working full-time, you can't just drop everything and sit in a classroom for 4 years. But if we can make it easier and cheaper for you to acquire an additional skill through a couple hours, through 2 courses online that allow you to receive a certificate, suddenly you qualify for the new job that pays more. We have to make it easier for you to do that as well. And my policies are all designed around that. That's what my policies are designed around. Make America the best place in the world to create better paying jobs and make it easier for you to acquire the additional skills you need to qualify for those better paying jobs.
Senator, this will be our last question today.
Okay. Well, we'll get Regina's too, so go ahead.
Senator, thank you for coming to Derry.
Thank you for having me.
My question is on the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
Article 5. There's a movement throughout this nation right now to have an Article 5 convention. Do you approve that, disapprove it, and if so, why?
If that's what citizens want, we should do it. My only concern is, and this is what I've raised to people that have called it, just make sure we know how it's going to turn out. Because if you open up the Constitution, you're also opening up to people that want to re-examine the First Amendment, people that want to re-examine the Second Amendment, people that want to re-examine some other fundamental protections that are built in within the Constitution. But ultimately, there's a provision that exists for citizens to amend their Constitution and re-examine it. And if our citizens want to do that, then I'll be supportive of it. But just be aware that the same groups that are trying to pass legislation to violate the Constitution are the same groups of people that are going to try to change that Constitution. We're going to have to fight them at that convention.
Senator, the next president is going to be able to appoint one, maybe two more Supreme Court justices. What is going to be your criteria for appointing them?
My criteria for appointing justices, not just Supreme Court justices, but justices especially at the appellate level, at every level of government, are people that adhere to that Constitution, that view the role of an appellate judge to apply the Constitution, not to creatively manipulate it, not to creatively spin it to reach a policy conclusion that they want. We've now reached a point in this country where we have judges basically who believe, we have justices, at least 5 on the Supreme Court, who believe that their job is to find creative ways to manipulate the Constitution to reach a policy outcome that they personally favor. That is not the job of our justices. The job of our justices is to apply that Constitution as strictly constructed under the founders, by the founders and by the amendments that followed it. The job of the appellate courts is to apply the Constitution, not to expand it or manipulate it. And so my number one criteria will be this. Are you a strict constructionist? Do you believe the Constitution as written should be lived by? And you understand that the only way to change that Constitution is through a convention or an amendment process, not through creative judicial decisions that expand the reach of the federal government and of that Constitution to areas it was never intended to reach. At the end of the day, that document that this gentleman was just holding a moment ago is a document of limitation. The Constitution is a document that limits the power of government. It basically says very straightforward, these are the only powers the federal government has. And if they're not outlined here, the federal government doesn't have these powers. They belong to the states, local communities, and primarily to people. And we need justices that understand that. We need that today more than ever before. All right. Well, I want to thank you. And I would stay longer. The only reason why I have to cut it short is I do have to catch an airplane somewhere, and it's not a private one, so they don't wait for me. But the good news is we're going to be back, particularly in this community, and we've enjoyed this tremendously. And again, I'm going to stay around for a few more minutes to say hello to you in person, and I look forward to seeing all of you again. Thank you for coming. God bless you.